Miriam Fisher, Mrs. Miriam Fisher, Miriam and Seth Fisher, Mrs. Seth. What's this? Caleb snatched the spiral notebook out of Miriam's hands. She grappled for the book, but Caleb, who was 3 inches taller, held it out of her reach. Give it back, she pleaded. Caleb gave her a malicious grin. Or what? You'll tell the teacher? Go ahead. She won't do nothing, not when there's only a month left of school. Panic flowed through her. Caleb, please, don't read it. Miriam Fisher? He glanced up from the page, looked at Miriam, then guffawed, his laugh bordering on a donkey bray. Miriam Fisher? He looked back down and kept reading, and then turned another page and started laughing again. Miriam wanted to die. Right there in the middle of the schoolyard, she prayed the earth would swallow her whole. It did not. Instead, she watched with horror as Caleb ran across the playground to the object of her affections, Seth Fisher, and interrupted the game of bare-handed baseball he was playing with his friends. Caleb thrust the notebook in front of him. Miriam had harbored a secret crush on Seth since 6th grade, but never dared tell anyone, not even her best friend Hannah. Now they were both 14 and near the end of their 8th grade year. Soon she wouldn't get to see him every day, to watch him from across the classroom, pretending to be engrossed in her schoolwork when all she could think about was how good-looking he was. For 2 years she hoped he would notice her. For 2 years she had spent her recesses not with her friends, but sitting in the corner of the schoolyard journaling her dreams in her notebook. She couldn't breathe as she watched Seth take the notebook and thumb through it. His expression never changed while he glanced over page after page filled with crudely drawn hearts and their names written in various combinations. Her palms grew slick as he looked up from the notebook and caught her gaze. He tossed the baseball to one of his buddies and made his way toward her. Her legs began to buckle. She had expected him to laugh like Caleb, but instead he strode across the playground, his dazzling blue-eyed gaze never leaving hers. Was it possible that he secretly liked her too? That he, like her, had been afraid to admit it? The thought of it brought a whole new wave of emotions flowing over her. Could she really be Mrs. Seth Fisher someday? Seth stopped in front of her, his friends straggling behind him. He was their leader, and he had been since they'd started school together. Tall, lean, he had filled out before most of the boys, and his voice had deepened last year. He wore his pale yellow straw hat tipped back on his head, giving her a full view of his handsome face. He looked much older than 14, more confident, without a trace of insecurity, unlike Miriam, who was filled with it. He held out the notebook. "This yours?" Pushing up her glasses, she nodded, her tongue suddenly too thick to formulate a verbal answer. "Here, take it." But when she reached for it, he jerked it out of her grasp and dropped it on the ground. Stepping square in the middle of it, he said, "Four-eyed beanpole." Then he kicked the notebook at her and laughed. Any flicker of hope she held inside died at that moment. Seth and his group walked away, some pointing and laughing, leaving her to pick up her journal. She lifted it from the ground, staring at the large heart filling the page, Miriam plus Seth, written in the middle. The dirty outline of a boot print was stamped on top. Across the playground she could still hear the boys laughing. Seth looked at her and circled his fingers around his eyes. Four-eyed beanpole.